Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 89 of Makai-World Reviews. I am the Tony Makai, a master of minds and of men. We are here to continue on with my birthday month of August and of course looking at the first 5 Star Trek movies. We did the original motion picture last week, but we are in for what is usually considered to be the best of the best in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I'm sure Khan's wrath is how Vince McMahon is feeling right about now. Well, let's go ahead and hit the subscribe button so we can continue on with this review. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Directed by Nicholas Meyer. I believe this will be the only time we see Nicholas, though he has directed other things in the Star Trek franchise, for good or bad. He also did the movie Time After Time about H.G. Wells pursuing Jack the Ripper in his time machine. It's actually a really entertaining movie that I never hear anyone talk about. Written by Jack B. Sowards. He has written some things for Star Trek and is credited with the creation of the famous test that Kirk beat and supposedly all cadets of Starfleet must take, the Kobayashi Maru. We will see it a lot in this movie. It's an important part of Star Trek history. Starring Ricardo Montalban, a charming and debonair man who's had something of a storied career, might be most famous for his long run on Fantasy Island, but I believe I grew up with him as a villain in Freakazoid, among many other voice acting roles he had. He was also one hell of a talented dancer. And DeForest Kelley, the original Bones himself, another guy with a long list of television acting before and after Star Trek. Though the last number of years he acted with strictly Star Trek, he knew what brought the money in and really leaned into it. I love Bones. He's probably my favorite original Star Trek character. Release date for this was June 4th, 1982, and what came out the same week? Poltergeist. Famous horror film that made a generation afraid of television static. It's legitimately a classic horror movie that I don't have much to say about. It's been a number of years since I've seen it. I wonder if it's held up. Maybe I'll come back to that. And Hanky Panky, somehow Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner stink up the joint in this low-effort comedy as a semi-sequel to the pretty good Stir Crazy. At best, it's a disappointment. Moving over to the plot, we start with the newest member of the Enterprise, Saavik, participating in classic Starfleet test. That is also nigh unwinnable in the Kobayashi Maru. She, of course, gets all of her crew killed and is admonished by Admiral James T. Kirk, though not terribly. That night, Kirk is visited at his home, which is more like a mausoleum, by McCoy or Bones, and we learn it's Kirk's birthday, and the Admiral expresses his fears of aging, of being worn down, of being useless, to his friend over some Romulan ale. We move to the SETI Alpha system with former Enterprise member Chekhov and his new captain Tyrell. They're looking for a barren planet to experiment on with a project called Genesis. Genesis is the brainchild of Dr. Carol Marcus and her son David, whom is Kirk's son, and they dubiously trust Starfleet. The planet Chekhov and Tyrell find might have some life on it, so they are set to investigate. But it's not long into the investigation they run across the man upon whose wrath is going to be imposed, Khan Noonien Singh, who recognizes Chekhov from their previous encounter aboard the Enterprise 15 years earlier. Khan isn't alone, and he has a small army of superhumans like himself. He also has disgusting giant earwig creatures that can make you susceptible to suggestion, which he uses on Chekhov and Tyrell to control them so that he can get aboard their ship, the Reliant. Since Khan and his group have been trapped on SETI Alpha 5, and they not only want off the planet, but to take vengeance upon James T. Kirk. They also, learning about Genesis, get Chekhov to contact Carol and tell her to give them the device, stating it was Admiral Kirk's orders. Kirk, by the by, heads off with the Enterprise to observe its training voyage with a mixture of old hands and new members of the crew. But it's not long before Carol contacts Kirk to find out what's going on with Genesis, and of course, Khan reveals himself and the two old enemies finally come face to face, as it were. After some posturing between the two enemies, Khan gets the advantage initially, damaging the Enterprise severely, but in his arrogance gives Kirk and co. time to regroup, and with some ingenuity, they manage to get the drop on the Reliant, causing Khan to flee to regroup. Both sides have suffered heavy losses to ship and crew as the Enterprise heads to Regular One, where Carol and David are, but they find the station's crew mostly dead, sans a warped Chekhov and Tyrell. Kirk takes a small team to investigate further, teleporting away to where Carol, David, and the Genesis device are. But thanks to Chekhov and Terrell being under Khan's influence, they get the drop on Kirk and others. Thankfully, Chekhov manages to fight back the earwig and is only rendered incapacitated, but Terrell kills himself before killing Kirk, attempting to kill Kirk, that is. He can't stand to do it, so he blows his brains out. Still, Khan steals the Genesis device and believes he has marooned Kirk there. Kirk meets David and has a tense conversation with Carol about could he have been a father to him? Could his life have gone differently? He feels old, worn out. Carol shows him what Genesis can do, finding an entire cave system full of life. Genesis is a terraforming mechanism. Kirk then takes everyone aboard the Enterprise, having known Khan would be listening to their transmission, lied so Khan would think they would be stuck. The Enterprise, with their captain and Spock leading them, prepare for a second battle against Khan. Both ships are damaged. Maybe they can trick Khan into and lead him into a nebula that will cause both of their shields and targeting to become useless. Khan is taunted into doing just that, and after some back and forth, Khan's ship is badly damaged, as is he, and he loses most of his crew. He decides on one last gambit to blow up the Genesis device, killing them both. The Enterprise can't warp. Its main reactor is too damaged and radiation is flooding in. And in a truly heroic act, Spock manages to curb the radiation and gets the reactor working long enough for the Enterprise to warp out as Khan explodes. But as he does this, he leaves new life in the universe, creation instead of destruction, as Genesis works as intended, creating a whole new planet there. Kirk then finds his friend dying and is unable to help. Spock tells Kirk that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one, and that he will always be his friend, that to live long and prosper. And with that, Spock is gone. Not long after, they hold a funeral for Spock, firing him off into the depths of space, as Kirk tells us that of all the souls he has encountered in his travels, Spock was the most human. He then bonds with David. We get a hint that because of Genesis, Spock might come back from the dead. Now, I don't usually have such a long overview of the story, but this movie had a lot of moving parts, a lot of important details that couldn't be missed. But let me be frank about this. It was awesome. This is one of the best action sci-fi movies out there. I stand by that. But why? Well, I'll go over that. Starting with director and cinematography, the directing is very competent. Really got a lot out of every scene here with some extra special performances I'll talk about shortly. But yeah, it's a very well done, well-paced, well-executed film. As far as the cine goes, even better than directing. The sets, the visuals, the everything. The movie looks great. It looks like Star Trek. Has so much less of that 70s bloat the last one did, and far more of a science fiction aesthetic it deserves. While it did reference some classic literature, it doesn't really ape any of it. It's far more in the sci-fi realm, and that's to the movie's strength. The acting, now, competent directing is fine, but if you don't have some performances to direct, it's all for naught. And in this, we got some real stand-up performances. I'm going to go over the four I thought we're mentioning, in order of least impressive to most impressive, I think. Spock and Leonard Nimoy, he's last on this list because while he did an awesome job, he was still essentially a support character to Kirk. He dispenses wisdom, he's a friend to Kirk, which I loved. All that tension from the first film is gone, and I'm glad. We see them bond and be real old chums, but he's mostly just there for a large portion of the film, just to be an emotional support animal of sorts. Of course, nearing the end, where he's sacrificed, that always has me in tears. It was a great job and a great temporary ending to this legendary character. If you weren't in tears as well, you're a monster. Also, his line, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, just wonderful. Seinfeld, among many, many others, referenced that classic line. And it's just good to see. Pavel Chekhov, Walter Koenig. Surprised to be putting him here, but he gave us stuff that's nightmare fuel to me for many years when I was a kid, and he did a pretty good job with it. His limits as an actor are clear and just what they are, but he did his very best given the expanded role of the character. There's one big issue I take with him in this movie. That's a writing problem, and I will address it later. But not only do we get a nice arc of Chekhov as the guy trying to help scientists, to the guy who figures out what's going on, to temporary villain, to nearing the end when he gets back on weapons to defeat the man who manipulated him. But the moments right before we meet Khan, when he realizes who he's dealing with, to the part where he puts the monsters in the ear, are genuinely good, like horror movie moments. The Khan reveal, the earwigs, them crawling into his face. It's all very good and creepy. Khan, Ricardo Montalban. really brought a lot more than you might imagine to this role. Physically, he looks imposing. I've heard that he had a fake chest in this, but really, I don't care if that's true, and there's little to no evidence of that anyways. But he and his group look like Frank Frazzetti characters, meaning with Fallout Raiders. They're tall and strong and badass, but with this piecemeal clothing, he has this curious glove. He just looks good and like a real threat. Beyond that, he has this classical literature villain attitude, which is very much what they were going for. We were told this movie is like Horatio Hornblower in space, and we get a sense of these two great ship captains going to battle, the pirate king here in Khan, and the British noble in Kirk, as it were. It gave their relationship a lot of fun and a sense of weight. Khan is ruthless, obsessive with vengeance, and as people speak against him, they have a ship, they're free of SETI Alpha, they even have the Genesis device, let's go and be free, and start a new civilization, but he won't do it. He even quotes, Moby Dick at the end when he's dying. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. And it's wholly appropriate. He fancies himself above all of his enemies. He fancies himself something other than human. And he learns that vengeance clouds you. He also has one of the really badass lines when he gives Kirk an order regarding Genesis. At the end of their first battle, Kirk asks Khan about keeping his word. Khan says, "I've given you no word to keep. In my judgment, you simply have no other choice." Really, one of the top villains of Star Trek history. One of. And Captain James T. Kirk, William Shatner, by far the best character, the best performance in this, and that kind of shocked me. I've seen this movie, of course, a number of times, but never with a real critical eye. It's easy to write off Shatner as a joke and a hack and a number of things that, well, it's hard to argue that he isn't. But this might be his finest performance as an actor. He has real strength of character here. We see this man getting older, wishing he had not taken that perceived gold ring of a promotion. And we start with his home. It's littered in antiques, weapons, swords. He enjoys old books, things of pride, of conquest, of old stories where men showed resilience. His admiration for the very old school for adventure in ways that he had and misses shows in his acting, and it got more subtle than you might imagine. We see him almost enjoying the battle with Khan. Almost. He enjoys the maneuvering, the outsmarting, the competition, but not the end result. He sees war as real, and I'll get into that shortly. But needless to say, he was an exceptional character here, and one I don't think we ever see again in this light. He had a couple of cool lines when insulting Khan. He says, "I'm laughing at the superior intellect," which was good. And when Carol first calls, Bones goes, "Oh, that's not good." And Kirk says, "As a physician, you should appreciate the dangers of opening old wounds." Good stuff. Moving on to the importance of the Kobayashi Maru and the weight of war. Kobayashi Maru is a Starfleet test that presents a no-win scenario for the persons taking it. It's about dealing with consequences of action. It's about dealing with life and death, and it frames the movie perfectly. We start with Savik's Kobayashi Maru test, and we end with Spock and Kirk's. Kirk famously cheated on the test, pre-programming it. Spock never took it. So we have these men who have never felt that challenge that is now upon them. Khan will push them into a situation where they can't win. And he does. Both of these men, like the training at the beginning, are forced to take this unwinnable test, but very much with real stakes. Spock has to die in this. There's no other choice. It's the only thing that could have saved the ship. Spock pragmatically has the answer to the Kobayashi Maru. The needs of the many outweighs the needs of the few, or the one, whichever can save the most, and Kirk reluctantly agrees. It's a really nice framing of the true stakes of the story. Speaking of, I mentioned the weight of war, and that's something we see. I said it briefly in both my rundowns of Kirk and Khan. We see the real cost of war in this. We see the two captains playing their game, but we see them both lose real people. We see the medical bay full on the Enterprise, even on the Reliant. Khan mourns his lost friends, people he had spent hundreds of years with, but he cannot stop himself. He cannot pull away from the full-throttle vengeance toward the inevitable ending. We see the cost of war, death and misery and loss of oneself. It's not often we see that death is a big deal in a sci-fi movie. Especially not something in like Star Wars where cannon fodder is aplenty. I really like that. Unlike the first film, which was an homage to Star Trek the Original Series episode, this one was a direct sequel from Space Seed, where Khan and his group are met. We don't need to know all that history. They do present the backstory. They do it quickly and intelligently. I just really like that connection. Now it's not all praise. I do have a few issues. A really big one in SETI Alpha 5 is where Khan was, abandoned with the SS Botany Bay by Kirk in Space Seed, and like Chekhov and Terrell think they are going to SETI Alpha 6. But still, wouldn't we know the SETI Alpha system is where we put these hyper-evil, superhumanly strong and intelligent assholes? Like he notices the SS Botany Bay thing, and that's a big reveal that that's Khan. But Chekhov wouldn't know before. Why not suggest to Starfleet they don't mess with the SETI Alpha system? It's very strange they just flat out doesn't seem to remember. I tried to look up some discourse about it online, but really found no acceptable reason why this occurred, save some bad writing. I mean, Khan and Chekhov know each other by name, but he doesn't recall what planet they put the guy on or system. It just bothered me. Saavik Christiali's character was kind of wasted here. And they change actresses for the next, I think she's 2 movies. So whatever. I thought she might be important, but ultimately it was just a background person who has a few extra lines of dialogue. They do the same with Kim Cattrall, I think, in the 6th movie. The blatant setup for Spock being alive is a little disappointing. I'd prefer them let us think he is dead here, then do all the resurrection stuff in the next movie. But we get a lot of really heavy-handed stuff about Genesis probably making him come back to life. And I mean, hell, the next movie is called The Search for Spock. It's just, it takes away from that beautiful climax a bit. As far as the soundtrack, excellent. So the last movie had a good soundtrack. This has a great one. Perfectly scored. That classical Star Wars feel with a little bit heavier moments for the epicness we got. Khan and Kirk got badass songs, both of them. And overall, it was just a really satisfying score to complement this movie. Overall, I think I've rambled on about this movie enough. This is much longer than my usual intent for review. It's also a really awesome movie, the best Star Trek movie and one of the best action science fiction movies. I make sure I say action because there are better, like, pure science fiction movies in other realms. But yeah, an utterly fantastic movie that I was really happy to get to talk about. This is not just a drinking movie. It's a movie you can enjoy alone, with your kids. If you want to introduce them to Star Trek, this is a really good introduction into that. Or with someone that maybe is hesitant about Star Trek and maybe they're a Star Wars fan and they've just never gotten into it. This is a good introduction. This is a good film to get anybody into Star Trek. So yeah. Well, that was the exceptional Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. What is your favorite Ricardo Montalban movie or show? Let me know down below. Also, don't forget to check out my Patreon where you can support this channel for as little as $1. That's just $1. Add me on Instagram under Demon Peaks for daily Twin Peaks memes. I also have a podcast, the Dark Peaks Podcast, and of course subscribe to this channel. And come back next week. We'll be looking at Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Will they find him? Spoilers, yes. This has been the Tony Makai, Master of Minds and Men. Thank you very much, and goodbye.